What happens when the line between family and desire blurs so completely that you can't even recognize yourself anymore? I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who could betray her husband. I certainly never imagined doing it with someone who carried his last name. But life has a way of unraveling you, in the quietest moments when no one is watching, except of course the one person who shouldn't be. I still remember the first time I noticed the tattoo. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the air feels heavy with unspoken things. My husband Richard was away on another business trip, his third that month, and the house felt too quiet, too empty. After 15 years of marriage, you learn to swallow loneliness like a bitter pill. But that night, the silence was different. It made my skin prickle with something I refused to name. And then he walked in. My stepson Daniel, 22 years old, stood there shirtless, fresh from the shower, water glistening on his collarbone. And there just above his heart, was a tattoo I'd never seen before. A single word in elegant script. Mine froze because I knew. God help me, I knew that word wasn't for some girl he'd met in college. It wasn't for a friend or a memory, or some youthful rebellion. The way he looked at me then, with a smirk that was equal parts challenge and invitation, told me everything. That tattoo was a message. And it was meant for me. I should have turned away. I should have laughed it off, made some comment about kids these days, and their tattoos, and buried myself in a glass of wine until the heat in my cheeks faded. But I didn't. I stared, and in that moment, something inside me cracked. Maybe it was the way the dim light caught the ink, making it look like a brand. Maybe it was the way Daniel took a slow step closer, his bare feet silent on the hardwood, his gaze never leaving mine. Or maybe it was the way my pulse roared in my ears, loud enough to drown out every rational thought, screaming at me to run. "You like it?" he asked, his voice low. It wasn't a question, it was a trap, and I walked right into it. I could lie and say I didn't know what was happening. I could pretend I was blindsided, that I was some helpless victim of circumstance. But the truth, I wanted to be caught, not in the way you think, not in some torrid lust-filled fantasy, no. It was deeper than that. It was the way his attention made me feel seen for the first time in years. Richard had long since stopped looking at me, like I was anything more than furniture, but Daniel watched. And that night, as I stood there in my silk robe, too thin, too revealing, though I'd never admit I'd chosen it deliberately, I realized something terrifying. I liked it. The next few seconds played out in slow motion. Daniel took another step, then another, until he was close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive, nothing like the cheap body spray he'd worn as a teenager. "Who's it for?" I whispered. Already knowing the answer, he didn't speak, instead he reached out, his fingers brushing the belt of my robe. "Guess," he said. And just like that, the last thread of my self-control snapped. This isn't a love story, it's a ruin. Because that tattoo, that one stupid reckless word, wasn't just a declaration, it was a prophecy. By the time I realized how deep the ink had really stained me, it was too late. And the worst part? I didn't even care. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was not always the kind of woman who kept secrets. At 42, I had built a life that looked perfect from the outside. A beautiful home in the suburbs of Chicago. A successful husband. A stepson who, until that night, had never given me a reason to question my role in his life. I was the woman who hosted charity galas, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who made sure the holidays were magical. But no one ever asks what it costs to be that woman. The truth, I was exhausted. Richard and I met at a law firm in our late 20s. He was ambitious, sharp, and back then, He looked at me like I was the only woman in the room. We married quickly, swept up in the kind of passion that feels like destiny. But destiny has an expiration date. By the time Daniel came into my life, Richard's son from his first marriage, just 16, when he moved in with us, the spark between Richard and me had long since fizzled. We were roommates, not lovers. Polite strangers sharing a bed, I tried. God, I tried. Date nights, therapy, even a disastrous weekend getaway that ended with us sleeping in separate rooms. But Richard had checked out, burying himself in work, in golf, in anything that wasn't us. And I buried myself in Daniel. First it was innocent, Daniel was grieving, angry at the world, and I became the closest thing he had to a mother. I packed his lunches, helped him with college applications, held him when he cried about his mom. Over time though, something shifted. He grew taller, broader, more aware, and the way he looked at me changed. It started with small things, lingering touches when he passed me a coffee, jokes that flirted with the edge of inappropriate, that look when I wore a dress he liked. I told myself it was nothing, faith, a young man testing boundaries. But then came the night I caught him staring at me from the pool, and I didn't look away. That summer, Richard was gone more than ever. Business trips, conferences, late nights at the office, that I stopped bothering to question. Daniel and I were alone together constantly, and the air between us grew thick with something unsaid. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, our hands brushed over a dish. He didn't pull back, neither did I. "You're really beautiful, Evelyn," he said. So casually, it could have been a compliment about the weather. My heart pounded like I'd been caught in a lie. "Daniel," I warned, but my voice wavered. He just smirked and walked away, leaving me standing there. My skin burning where he touched me. And then came that night. The night he showed me the tattoo, mind, a word that should have repulsed me. A word that should have sent me running to Richard, to a therapist, to anyone who could have talked sense into me. But it didn't, because for the first time in years, I felt wanted. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Daniel acted normal, too normal, smirking at me over breakfast like we shared a secret. And we did, just not the one he thought. The secret was this: I was considering it. Considering crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Considering betraying my husband, considering him. It's not cheating if it's just in your head. I whispered to myself in the mirror as I reapplied my lipstick, my hands shaking. But the truth, it was already more than that. Because when Daniel texted me later that day, "Thinking about you," I didn't delete it. I saved it. 3 words, that's all it took to unravel me completely. I stared at my phone screen, Daniel's message glowing in the dark of my bedroom. Richard was away again, and the house felt like a tomb. Silent except for the hammering of my own pulse in my ears. I should have ignored it. I should have deleted it. I should have texted back something stern, something motherly. Something that would have shut this down before it began. Instead, I typed, "What are you thinking?" And just like that, I handed him the match to burn my life to the ground. His reply came instantly, "How gentle you were last night." My breath caught. This wasn't flirting anymore, this wasn't some harmless game. I waited for guilt to hit me, for shame, for something that would make me stop. But all I felt was alive. The next message lit up my screen, "Come to my room." The hallway between my bedroom and his had never felt longer. Every step was a betrayal, every heartbeat was a lie, and yet I didn't turn back. His door was slightly ajar, a sliver of golden light spilled onto the carpet. I pushed it open. Daniel was sitting on the edge of his bed, shirtless, his tattoo, that damn tattoo, on full display. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just watched me with those dark knowing eyes, as I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I expected him to pounce, to claim me like his tattoo promised. But he didn't. He just sat there, studying me, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. "You're scared," he finally said. It wasn't a question, I swallowed. "I shouldn't be here." "But you are," he countered. And then God, help me. He reached out and traced a single finger down my arm so lightly it could have been an accident. I shuddered, and he smiled. "This doesn't mean anything. It's just once, I can stop any time." But we both knew the truth. This wasn't a mistake, this was a choice. Afterward, I expected to feel sick, to cry, to beg some unseen force for forgiveness. But I didn't. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. Daniel's fingers tangled in my hair. And then he said the one thing that shattered whatever was left of my conscience. "I've wanted this for years, and I realized, with a horror that should have drowned me, that so had I." I slipped out of his room before dawn, my body still humming with the memory of him. I told myself it was over, a one-time lapse, a moment of weakness I would bury and never speak of again. But then I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My lips were swollen, my hair was wild, and my eyes, my God, my eyes, looked happy for the first time in years. That's when I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The sunlight streaming through the curtains felt like an accusation. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the empty space beside me, where Richard should have been. His flight wasn't due back until evening. But the weight of his absence, the irony of it, was suffocating. What had I done? My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Last night was real. Don't pretend it wasn't." I threw the phone across the room, like it had burned me. Richard returned home that evening, his suitcase rolling behind him like a faithful dog. He kissed my cheek, the same cheek Daniel's stubble had scratched, and asked about my week. "Nothing exciting," I said, pouring him a glass of wine, "just the usual." The lie slid off my tongue like honey. Across the room, Daniel smirked into his coffee. It started with glances, a lingering stare across the dinner table, a brush of fingers when passing the salt, a slow, deliberate stretch of his tattooed chest, when he knew I was watching. Richard noticed nothing, but I noticed everything. One evening, Richard dozed off on the couch, the news droning in the background. Daniel and I were alone in the kitchen washing dishes. His voice was a whisper, "You miss me." I dropped a glass, it shattered at my feet. Richard startled awake, "Everything okay?" Daniel knelt beside me. "Just a little slip," he said, smiling up at me, "no permanent damage." The double meaning hung in the air like smoke. 2 weeks later, Daniel cornered me in the laundry room. "I can't do this anymore," he growled, backing me against the dryer. "I won't share you," my heart pounded. "What are you saying? Tell him," he demanded. "Or I will." That's when I found the texts. Daniel had left his phone unlocked, a rare mistake. And there it was, a thread with some girl named Lena. "When are you going to dump the old lady?" She'd written, his reply, "Soon. She's just a game." The screen blurred as my hands shook. Had any of this been real? I confronted him that night, my voice trembling with rage. Was any of this real, or was I just some conquest? Daniel didn't deny it, just shrugged. "Does it matter? You liked it?" And that was the knife to the heart, because he was right. The next morning, Richard found Daniel's phone, with our texts, with our photos, with everything. His face went pale. Evelyn, what is this? Daniel stood silent in the doorway, watching me with cold, satisfied eyes. And I realized too late, this had been his plan all along. The air in the room turned to glass. Richard's hands trembled as he scrolled through the damning evidence on Daniel's phone. His breath came in short, ragged bursts, the kind that precedes either tears or violence. I stood paralyzed, my pulse roaring in my ears, like a freight train. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching us with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an experiment. Well, he said, breaking the silence. Aren't you going to say something, Dad? Richard's voice was barely recognizable. Tell me this isn't real. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. What could I say? That I'd been seduced, that I was lonely. That I hadn't meant for any of this to happen. None of it would matter now. Daniel laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. Oh, it's real, she's been coming to my room for weeks. Richard's fist connected with the wall, so hard the framed family photo next to him crashed to the floor. The glass shattered, just like us. Why? Richard's question wasn't directed at me. He was staring at his son, his face a mask of betrayal and dawning horror. Daniel pushed off the doorframe and took a step forward, because I could. The simplicity of it was worse than any elaborate excuse. It wasn't about love, it wasn't about me at all. I was just the battlefield, where they'd settled an old war. Richard turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. Pack your things, get out. Daniel's smirk faltered. Wait, you too? Richard snarled. I don't care whose blood you are. For the first time Daniel looked uncertain. Dad, that's not my name anymore. I fled upstairs, my legs moving on autopilot. Clothes went into suitcases, with no thought or care. Jewelry, passport, the emergency cash I'd hidden years ago, and never touched. A shadow filled the doorway. Daniel, this wasn't supposed to happen, he said, uncharacteristically quiet. I zipped the bag with more force than necessary. What did you think would happen? That we'd ride off into the sunset? He didn't answer. The doorbell rang. 2 police officers stood on the porch. Richard had called them, not for me but for Daniel. We've received a report of stolen property, one said, eyeing Daniel. A watch, credit cards. Daniel's face went pale. You're lying. Richard appeared behind me, holding up a velvet box. Grandfather's Rolex. Found it in his sock drawer. The officers cuffed Daniel on the spot. As they led him away, he twisted to look back at me. Not with anger, but something worse. Regret. The taxi idled in the driveway. Richard didn't watch me leave. He just stood at the window, his reflection hollow-eyed in the glass. I had no home, no family, no plan. Just the tattoo burned into my memory. But I wasn't free. I never had been. The fluorescent lights of the cheap motel buzzed like angry wasps. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, staring at my hands. The same hands that had touched him, held him, betrayed everything I once believed about myself. Who am I now? The mirror across the room showed a stranger. Smudged mascara, tangled hair, lips still slightly swollen from last night's kisses. I looked like the other women I'd secretly judged. The desperate ones, the foolish ones, the homewreckers. Now I was their queen. My sister picked up on the third ring. Evelyn, it's 2 a.m. I need somewhere to stay. There was then the sigh I knew too well. The one that said, "I told you so," without words. "Richard finally left you." "No," I whispered. "I left him." Another pause. "I'll text you the guest code." She didn't ask why. Maybe she already knew. 3 days later, the Chicago Tribune notice appeared online. Carter Richard J. announcing dissolution of marriage to Evelyn M. Carter due to irreconcilable differences. 15 years reduced to a legal footnote. But it was the second article that made me vomit. Local man arrested for fraud, theft. Daniel Carter, 22, allegedly stole over $15,000 in heirlooms from family residence. The accompanying photo showed Daniel in an orange jumpsuit, his tattoo peeking out above the collar. The prison visiting room smelled like bleach and regret. Daniel looked older under the harsh lights. His cocky smirk replaced by something hollow. "You came." I folded my shaking hands. I needed to understand. Understand what? Was any of it real? He leaned forward, chains clinking. Does it matter? The truth hit me then. It didn't. Because whether he'd loved me or used me, the outcome was the same. I stood to leave. "Evelyn." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." I didn't turn around. Richard's lawyer delivered it a week later. A single sheet of heavy vellum. "Evelyn. The house is sold. Your things are in storage. Don't contact me again. No accusations. No curses. Just 15 words that erased my life. I burned it in the sink. The parlor stung of antiseptic and bad decisions. You sure about this? The artist asked, eyeing my trembling hands. I nodded, pressing the design to my ribs. A single word in elegant script, mirroring the one I'd memorized on his skin. Asterisk free. Asterisk I saw. The news 6 months later in a coffee shop. CEO Richard Carter relocates to London. The photo showed him smiling beside a blonde woman. His new junior partner. According to the gossip sites. My coffee went cold. Outside. The first snow of winter began to fall. Covering everything in clean blank white. Like a fresh start. Like a lie. The story serves as a harrowing exploration of human weakness. The consequences of unchecked desire. And the destructive power of emotional neglect. Evelyn's descent into infidelity was not merely a lapse in judgment, but the culmination of years of emotional abandonment, demonstrating how easily vulnerability can be exploited. When one's sense of self-worth is eroded by neglect. Daniel's manipulation exposes the predatory nature of some relationships, where power dynamics masquerade as passion, proving that not all attention is genuine. Some is merely a weapon disguised as affection. Richard's emotional detachment and eventual ruthless dismissal of both Evelyn and Daniel reveal how pride and avoidance can destroy relationships just as thoroughly as outright betrayal, illustrating that silence and indifference are their own forms of betrayal. The tattoo, initially a symbol of twisted possession, ultimately becomes Evelyn's mark of painful liberation, showing that sometimes we must endure the consequences of our worst mistakes to truly reclaim ourselves. The story warns against the seductive danger of seeking validation in forbidden places, as the temporary thrill of being desired is often outweighed by the irreversible damage left in its wake. It also highlights the cyclical nature of pain. Daniel's revenge against his father. Through Evelyn mirrors his own unresolved trauma, proving that hurt people often hurt others, perpetuating a chain of destruction. The legal and social fallout. Each character faces underscores that actions have consequences beyond the immediate emotional chaos, with reputations, livelihoods, and futures permanently altered by moments of weakness. Evelyn's final tattoo. *free. Asterisk. Suggests that true freedom comes not from escaping consequences, but from accepting them, learning, and moving forward with hard-earned wisdom. The story challenges readers to examine their own moral boundaries, asking whether loneliness justifies transgression, whether manipulation negates consent, and whether anyone in this tangled dynamic was truly innocent. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. That people are capable of both great love and great cruelty, sometimes within the same relationship. The absence of a tidy resolution reflects real life, where broken trust rarely mends cleanly, and some scars never fully fade. Ultimately, the tale serves as a cautionary fable about the dangers of emotional neglect, the toxicity of revenge disguised as passion, and the high price of momentary gratification, reminding us that the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves to justify our choices. The story's conclusion. With Evelyn alone, Richard remarried, and Daniel imprisoned, suggests that while life moves on, it rarely offers the redemption we expect, leaving each character to live with the irreversible consequences of their actions. The moral center of the narrative rests on the idea that self-destruction often wears the mask of liberation. True healing begins only when we stop blaming others and take responsibility for our own choices. It also exposes the societal double standards surrounding infidelity, where women like Evelyn are often judged more harshly than the men who neglect or manipulate them, revealing deeper biases about desire, age, and agency. The story's lingering question, was any of it real? Haunts the narrative, suggesting that even the most intense can be built on illusions, and the search for validation in the wrong places leads only to emptiness. In the end, the tale leaves readers with a sobering truth. Some mistakes cannot be undone. Some trust cannot be rebuilt. And some wounds never fully heal. But self-awareness and acceptance are the first steps toward any semblance of peace. The cyclical nature of the character's pain. Evelyn seeking love, Daniel seeking revenge, Richard avoiding emotional labor, shows how generational and relational patterns repeat until someone breaks the chain, even if the breaking leaves everything in ruin. The story's lack of clear heroes or villains makes it a mirror rather than a parable, forcing readers to sit with discomfort rather than offering easy answers, reflecting the messy reality of human relationships, where right and wrong are rarely absolute. It serves as a stark reminder that the pursuit of fleeting desire often comes at the cost of lasting stability, and the things we think will fill our voids only deepen them. The final image of snow covering everything in white symbolizes not purity or a fresh start, but the chilling silence that follows destruction. The quiet after the storm, where all that remains is the choice to rebuild or remain in the wreckage. The story's greatest lesson is that the most dangerous prison is the one we build for ourselves through our choices. And the only escape is through brutal honesty, accountability, and the willingness to face what we've done and who we've become.